Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Rocco, again, and today we're going to be taking a look at one of my all-time favorites, an absolute classic in the hard rock and heavy metal genre. Black Sabbath's 1973 masterpiece, Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. That title says it all. This album here, it's their defining moment, guys. It's the Sgt. Pepper's of Black Sabbath. It's the fucking Dark Side of the Moon of Black Sabbath. It's the Led Zeppelin 4 of Black Sabbath. This was, in my opinion, I think the band's definitive statement. And for a band that went through so many different lineup changes and so many different, I don't know, I was going to say style changes, but really they stayed true to heavy metal. It's hard to say what their defining moment is. Of course, with the Dio era, that was a totally different beast, and I think Heaven and Hell was their defining moment as well. But for Aussie ears, Sabbath at least, I think Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath is the one. Now, I know what you're thinking, guys. If you've been watching my Black Sabbath reviews and my ranking videos, you'll know that this actually isn't my favorite Sabbath album. And now here's the thing. A few other albums, like their debut and Master of Reality, to name two of them, they just mean a lot to me personally. So for personal reasons, I kind of put those albums at the top, and then I always have either this or Heaven and Hell at number 3. But I gotta look at this objectively, guys, and objectively speaking, this is Black Sabbath's most original, their most complex, their most replayable album. I mean, there's so much diversity going on here, and unlike Volume 4, where the band were just throwing in all kinds of different weird styles into their music, with Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, they really found a way to harmonize all the experimentation of Volume 4 and all the heaviness, dirginess, sludginess of their first 3 albums into one masterpiece. And I really think all the cards, they had all the right cards in their hands. Everything was just fitting into place at this point with what was going on in the music industry. And they took influences from a lot of my favorite genres of music, namely progressive rock, and incorporated that into their already solid heavy metal, dirge-like Birmingham Black Sabbath sound that we all know and love so much. And that's honestly why I think Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath is their defining moment. Also, as songwriters, they really just, wow, guys. The songwriting on this album is just off the fucking charts. It's just phenomenal. Some of the melodies they come up with would make the Beatles fucking proud on this album. But yeah, anyway, guys, such a fantastic album. Just one that means so much to me personally. So many of these songs are just so special, so memorable, and I'm going to have a field day talking about it. But first, as always in my reviews, we're going to have to go through a little bit of background history. If you don't want to hear this section, if you're already well-versed with Sabbath history, honestly, feel free to skip ahead. I have a table of contents in the description below for fans that just want to hear reviews of certain songs and certain aspects. So definitely don't feel free to watch the entire show here. But if you want to stay tuned for some really interesting Sabbath history, then be my guest and stay tuned. Alright, guys, so seeing as this is Sabbath we're talking about here, the background of the album, what went into the making of this thing, was extremely fucking crazy, extremely bonkers. And honestly, I'm begging for a Black Sabbath biopic. It will be the most interesting, the funniest, the most heartfelt, and the most dramatic of all rock biopics of all time, because their history is just so interesting. Just all the crazy shenanigans they went through, all the bullshit they went through, especially starting with the next album, Sabotage, clashing with the studio and the producers and their managers and everything. It would make for such an interesting story. So, I'm waiting for that one day. I'll be the first one in line for the fucking theaters. But anyway, talking about Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, let's just rewind the clock back a bit to Volume 4, where Black Sabbath were recording in California for the first time. And during the recording of that album, they discovered a certain white powdery substance called cocaine. And Volume 4 was just their most cocaine-fueled album. I mean, these guys were just basically living off the stuff. But surprisingly enough, Volume 4 was a fantastic album. Like, the end result was perfect. It was very eclectic, had all these different styles thrown in, and a very strange and very weird album in Sabbath's discography. So after all that shit happened, if you guys want some more detail, check out my Volume 4 review. They went on tour for that album, and at this point, the cocaine was really starting to get to them. I mean, these guys were freaking exhausted. Now, let's not forget, Sabbath's debut album came out in 1970. And this is like late 72 at this point, early 73. They already had 4 albums under their belt. and they were just constantly like writing, recording, touring, writing, recording, touring. And I guess the cocaine can help you with that to a certain extent, keep you prepped up, keep you awake. But after a while, you just get fucking exhausted on that stuff, and it was really taking a toll on Tony Iommi, who really was carrying the band on his shoulders. Like, he was the one writing all the riffs, coming up with all the ideas, and it was really his band. And the exhaustion just really got to him on that tour, and apparently at one point even collapsed after a gig, and like they had to rush him to the hospital or something like that. Like, he wasn't able to function anymore. So the band were literally on the brink of destruction. And this is 1972, 1973 we're talking about here. So it's amazing how long they persisted. But yeah, really the whole band was just coked out of their minds, and especially Tony Iommi. So after that tour, they had to go back into the recording studio. So they went back to California since they had such a great time there. And Tony Iommi noticed something, like the riffs just weren't coming to him. He picked up his guitar, ready to write some riffs, and nothing was coming out of him. Up till this point, this guy was a fucking machine, cranking out classic riff after classic riff. Probably no one single guitarist has cranked out as many classic, iconic riffs as Tony Iommi. And, even up to this point, even up to 1972, 73, any other guitar player can die happy with a body of work that memorable and that iconic. So, you know what, we got to give Tony Iommi a break for having writer's block here, but his writer's block was absolutely severe. And the band were just sitting around in the California mansion, waiting for him to come up with riffs, and he just couldn't. He was freaking exhausted. He just didn't have the mental capacity to come up with riffs. And it's just that right there is just a testament to how integral Tony Iommi was to Black Sabbath. And I know I'm preaching to the choir right now, and that's obvious, but the rest of the band just couldn't do fuck all without the initial riff ideas from Tony Iommi. And that's just what happened. Like, they didn't do anything. They just sat around in California for a month. And funny enough, it was, they should have known this was going to happen, because right when they walked into their studio, they noticed that Stevie Wonder's huge fucking synthesizer basically took up the whole space of the studio, and basically where they kept all their other equipment, it was just being taken up by this giant-ass synthesizer. So, that was a bad omen right off the bat. They should have realized, they should have said, okay, this whole California thing isn't working out. But no, they persisted. And after a month of literally nothing happening, they're like, yeah, this shit isn't working out. And what would happen next was just absolutely hilarious. One of the funniest stories in Sabbath history. So anyway, they go back to England. And I think Tony Iommi at this point was attributing his writer's block to the whole scenery of California. The bright, sunny landscape doesn't really lend itself to writing heavy riffs. So what does he do? He rents out this medieval castle somewhere in England. I think it was called Clearwell Castle. And a few bands had written there before, but he thought that this castle would kind of reinvigorate him with the dark atmosphere that he really needed to write these heavy-ass riffs. And that's exactly what ended up happening. So the whole band ended up moving into the castle. They set up their writing studio, whatever you want to call it, in the fucking dungeons of all places. So that's got to be one of the most metal things I've ever heard in my life. Just writing a metal album in the dungeons of this old medieval castle. And all of a sudden, you know what? Tony Iommi was a genius, because right away, the riff of Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath came to him. And we all know how iconic that riff is. Probably the greatest Black Sabbath riff, or at least up there. And from that moment on, Tony Iommi was back in business. He was totally reanimated. And Ozzy Osbourne could not believe it, because they were all just sitting around. Tony Iommi picks up the guitar, cranks out that riff, and they were just speechless. I mean, Ozzy Osbourne couldn't believe how fantastic that riff is. Geezer was getting excited, thinking, yeah, we're back, baby. Tony's back in business. And when Tony's back in business, Sabbath's back in business. That's how it goes. So really, once that riff came out, Tony Iommi went back to being the machine, cranking out riff after riff after riff, and the writer's block was totally gone. So whether you want to attribute that to the dark atmosphere of the castle, just inspiring the guy, reanimating the guy, or maybe he was doing a bit less cocaine now because he wasn't in California anymore, and but whatever you want to attribute it to, it doesn't matter, because the end result is all that's important, and it's just fucking phenomenal. So the band hit the ground running in Clearwell Castle, and they started writing this masterpiece. Now here's the funny thing. Clearwell Castle, it's long been known to be haunted, and whether you believe in that stuff or not doesn't really matter. because what happened was the band started seeing all kinds of crazy shit go down. One time, Geezer and Tony, they were just walking down the hall, and they saw this hooded figure walking into the armory of the castle. So they followed this hooded figure. Then when they went into the armory, there was no one to be seen. And they would just see all kinds of like freaky shit like this, all these weird apparitions. And then they would talk to the landlords of the castle, or the owners, whatever you want to call them. And they would say, oh yeah, that's just the ghost of so-and-so, just talking about it so nonchalantly. And the whole band was just freaked out by this because the owners seemed to know exactly what was going on. It was definitely a haunted castle, at least from Sabbath's point of view. And that's really all that matters, whether you believe in it or not. And here's the thing. At first, Sabbath were scared shitless. They would literally go there, write some shit, and then drive all the way back to their homes, which were like literally over an hour away, and then come back again in the morning, when there were like really ample accommodations for the whole band to sleep over and kind of stay there. They were just scared shitless. And there was this one quote from Ozzy saying, at the time, they weren't the lords of darkness, they were the lords of chicken shit, because that castle absolutely scared the fuck out of them. And but then after a while, they started getting used to it. And what they ended up doing, these crazy bastards, is they ended up playing pranks on each other, kind of capitalizing on the haunted nature of the castle. And poor Bill Ward, man, this guy was always the brunt of these pranks. And the poor guy, at one point, he was even sleeping with a dagger by his side, fearing the worst. But yeah, they really drove each other fucking crazy in this castle. It must have been a sight to behold. Poor Bill Ward, especially after all the shit he went through on Volume 4, all the pranks they pulled on him. Had to get fucking hospitalized at one point. But yeah, so anyway, the making of this album was just one crazy shenanigan after another. And then when it was finally time to record this thing, they went into the studio and they laid it down. And these guys, they were just really ambitious on this album. They hired a fucking orchestra to play on the song Spiral Architect, which is hilarious because this orchestra couldn't fit into the studio. So they had to actually go to a nearby studio, which was luckily down the road, to fit this fucking orchestra in there. And obviously, the band had no experience with classical music and conducting a fucking orchestra. So they literally had Ozzy talking to these guys, just humming the different sections, kind of trying to get across the kind of mood and atmosphere he was going for. And the orchestra followed. So either Ozzy was actually a very good conductor, or the orchestra was just literally that professional, where they could take this crazy madman's humming and singing and convert that into beautiful orchestral music. And it makes a big difference, because Spiral Architect is just one of the most beautiful Sabbath songs, in my opinion. So yeah, really ambitious. Another thing is they brought all kinds of different equipment into the studio for the writing and recording of this album. A lot of instruments they hadn't really used before. Like, they brought in the Moog synthesizer. Ozzy actually brought that one in. He bought it somewhere. And yeah, the band were just experimenting with a whole bunch of different instruments. Tony Iommi tried to learn the bagpipes. He tried to learn the sitar. Now, unfortunately, those experiments didn't work out, so you're not going to be hearing any bagpipes or Indian sitar-inspired music on this album. But it's the thought that counts. These guys are really going out of their way to experiment. And funny enough, Yes, of all bands, were recording in the room next door in the studio, recording their 1973 magnum opus, Tales from Topographic Oceans, which I definitely have to talk about one day. That album's just absolutely insane. And Rick Wakeman was famously not very happy with the making of the album. He thought it was overblown, pretentious, which it is. It's good, but overblown and pretentious, definitely. So he would honestly be wandering the studio, and he ended up meeting the acquaintance of Sabbath. They ended up becoming pretty tight, pretty close friends. He was more of just, your everyman, just wanted to drink a few brews backstage, have a good chat, and the rest of Yes were just basically reading all these Indian scriptures and doing all this pretentious shit like that. So Rick Wakeman was really the everyman, and there's no band that embodies the everyman more than Black Sabbath. So they were great. They became great friends. And Rick Wakeman actually offered to play piano on Sabbra Cadabra, a track on this album. Made a huge fucking difference to that track. And it went down so well. The band was just gelling in the studio. And I feel like if Sabbath hired Rick Wakeman permanently and continued making music like that, I honestly wouldn't even complain. Like, it doesn't detract from the heaviness or anything. It just adds that funky, groovy edge to it. So yeah, Rick Wakeman played on that song, and he refused any monetary compensation. It was just a pleasure. And funny enough, when I saw Sabbath in 2016 on their The End tour, the offstage keyboard player is actually Adam Wakeman, the son of Rick. So their friendship must have transcended generations, which is really cool. So anyway, they recorded, released the album, and the album did fantastic. Again, Sabbath were a rising band at this point. Ever since Paranoid went platinum or something, Sabbath had been selling out millions and millions of albums, and this one here was no exception. It went platinum, and for the first time in their entire career, they were actually getting good reviews. Rolling Stone, the one magazine that pretty much slagged every single fantastic hard rock band in the early 70s, they were even giving them good reviews. So that just goes to show how popular Sabbath was at this point. And yeah, this album here just really showed that they were developing as songwriters. And we'll get more into that with the overall review, but I think the whole band was just extremely happy with it. To this day, most members of the band kind of consider this the epitome. Tony Iommi definitely considers this their best album, calling it the Pinnacle at one point. And Ozzy loves this album so much that he even said that Sabbath should have disbanded after this. I totally disagree because, come on, fucking Sabotage. I think Ozzy just forgot about how great Sabotage was. But then again, he might have been saying that because they did run into a lot of problems with Sabotage onward. And although the music was fantastic, there were a lot of struggles with management and things like that. But yeah, so maybe Ozzy was right in that sense, but they did make a lot of great music after this as well, before Dio came into the band. So I can't say I agree with you, Ozzy, but anyway, the whole band freaking adores this album, and I think most fans do consider this or Paranoid probably the best of the whole Ozzy era, and I can't disagree with that, guys. So, just one more thing I want to talk about before I get into the review. The album cover. Just absolutely iconic. I mean, on the front cover, we get this guy going through an absolutely gruesome, disturbing death with demons hovering over his bed. And, you could tell the guy's freaking suffering out of his mind. But then you flip the album over to the back, and we get the same painting, but it's a peaceful death. So the same guy surrounded by his loved ones, his family. And it's just a fantastic album cover. It just jumps out at you. And a lot of the people that got into this album early on really say that it was the album cover that kind of lured them in. So again, really, really standing by my point where an album cover could either make or break an album. Because if you're in the record store and you see an album cover with like a lame, fucking boring cover, that's not going to make you want to buy the album if you don't know who the artist is. Sure, if you know who that artist is already and you're a fan, you're going to buy it regardless. But with an album like Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, who wouldn't buy that shit? It probably turned on a whole new audience to their music. So fantastic album cover. Much better than the one that came before it and the one that came after it. Alright guys, so that's kind of the history and the making behind this album. Really the last hurrah in Sabbath's discography before everything went to shit with Sabotage, with all their struggles and everything like that. Again, still great music, but a lot of hardships following the band. So this was really the epitome, both musically and in terms of what they were going through as a band behind the scenes. So let's dive into the overall review. Alright guys, so let's dive deep into Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. I mean, there's so much to say about this thing. And really, when I was trying to think about the essence of this album, like what is it about this album that makes it widely regarded to be one of the greatest Ozzy era albums? And the more I thought about it, the more I realized it's really the songwriting on this album. And that's not to say that their songwriting before Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath wasn't fucking amazing, because it was. They had basically written the textbook and the manual on heavy, slow, doomy riffs, tight, bluesy jams, and extremely menacing and sinister atmospheres. Like, they were already masters at that. But what they did with Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath was they really honed their songwriting, really excelled at creating really catchy melodies, arranging the songs in perfect ways, multi-segment songs that really weren't like their previous tracks where they would kind of glue 2 or 3 songs together with some weird transitions in between. These ones here really represent fully realized and composed pieces of music with a lot of different sections that seamlessly flow in and out of each other and go through a lot of different moods and atmospheres without it having that jarring kind of, oh, now we're getting into a different song, but then checking the actual album and, oh, it's the same song. For example, I could think of a few, probably, there's a lot actually, especially on their debut album with NIB, That's Sweet, and then Wheels of Confusion on Volume 4, things like that. Here we have these tight, cohesive tracks that never feel like you're going through all these abrupt changes in the song. It always feels seamless and transitional. And all these songs here create different moods and different atmospheres within the same track. I mean, just taking Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, for an example, I mean, it's one of the heaviest Sabbath tracks, one of the heaviest riffs, but yet Ozzy Osbourne just perfectly incorporates this melodic, emotional line right on top of that. It's not like the song had to transition into something completely different to have that really melodic, emotional moment. It's perfectly interwoven, perfectly superimposed on top of that heaviness. So really, the band never really did this before, and I really think the arrangements of the songs here are just absolute genius, and really shows their progressive side. And again, I really think that comes from the whole progressive rock scene at the time. This was 1972, 1973 we're talking about here, and progressive rock had reached peak popularity at this time. We had bands like Jethro Tull. They had released things like Thick as a Brick, Yes with Close to the Edge, Genesis with Foxtrot selling England by the pound. This was really the epitome of the progressive rock genre, and Sabbath must have definitely been listening to it, because on this album here, they incorporated a lot of instruments they had barely touched in the past. They brought in the Moog synthesizer, just regular synthesizer, goddamn Rick Wakeman on the piano, and all kinds of different things going on here that would be considered un-Sabbath, or things you would have never heard on those sludgy, dark albums like Master of Reality and Paranoid. They were really branching off, really trying different things. And again, the orchestra, I forgot to mention the orchestra on the last track. Every single song has this thing about it that sets it apart from the previous Sabbath discography. And I love that. And you know what? I know I mentioned this already, but the melodies on this album are absolutely incredible. Some of the catchiest melodies in heavy metal, and some of the most emotional, heartfelt moments in Sabbath's entire discography that just give you feelings of euphoria, to be honest. But again, interwoven within the heavy architecture, the heavy skeleton that Tony Iommi's phenomenal riffs lay down here. And I mean phenomenal riffs. Some of the all-time greatest. The title track has two of the best riffs I ever heard in my life. National fucking Acrobat, and so on and so forth. So this album here, although it brings in all these elements from progressive rock and, dare I say, even pop music with some of the melodies, it still maintains that early Sabbath heavy doomy feel. A bit less than Master of Reality and Volume 4, but it's still there. It's still there in the architecture and the framework, and it never feels like it's lacking on the album. Like, you're never really listening to it thinking like, oh fuck, I wish this was heavier. It just all falls into place. And again, those beautiful melodies. And we got to give Ozzy credit for those melodies. I mean, you know, he may not have been very music savvy when it came to playing instruments and writing down music and things like that. But the melodies, the vocal melodies he came up with were just a huge component of Sabbath. And really, on this album, I mean, again, you listen to things like the title track, you listen to things like Sabbra Cadabra, Spiral Architect, and his vocal melodies, I said this at the beginning of the video, would make the Beatles proud. They're so accessible and so melodic, and it's nothing you would really consider to be part of you wouldn't really consider it to be heavy metal, but yet it works in the overall framework of the music here. So absolutely phenomenal. And his voice on this album, since we're on the topic of Ozzy, is just fantastic. It has that reverb effect to it that would kind of continue throughout his entire career, but he's singing such a higher pitch than usual, and it gives the album this like fucking intensity that a lot of the earlier ones didn't have, especially with his very bluesy vocals on the debut album and Paranoid. This one here is just shrieking at some points, which is really cool. And with that reverb effect, gives it that classic Ozzy sound. Now I mentioned this album has a lot of diversity to it within the tracks, but between the tracks as well, there is a lot. Like, the pacing on this album is absolutely fantastic. You got a nice instrumental kind of breaking up the action. You got a funky inspired track with National Acrobat in the middle of the song there. You get that orchestral section at the end. You got this doomy mood synthesized piece called Who Are You from Ozzy. Just so much variety throughout the album to just keep everything sounding fresh and enjoyable. Whereas on albums like Master of Reality, sure, that album's a fucking masterpiece, but a lot of the songs really stay within that doomy atmosphere. This one here really branches out, it really blossoms and expands on different musical genres. And just so easy to see why this album would appeal to so many people. Sure, if you're a hardcore Black Sabbath purist and all your songs have to be doomy and heavy as fuck, this may not be your favorite album. But if you're someone like me who's more into the progressive rock genre and really appreciates really every aspect of music, I think you're really gonna love this album. And really, there aren't any flaws I can think of. I used to think Fluff was kind of a filler track. Now I absolutely love it, and I honestly can't think of a single flaw this album has. It's just perfection from start to finish. Sure, some songs are better than others, but overall, it just feels like the perfect metal album, and I can honestly say it's a masterpiece. The only thing, I guess I can criticize on this album is that Bill Ward, his drumming has always been a highlight for Sabbath for me. Like, every album up till this point, up till Volume 4, had some absolutely insane Bill Ward drumming moments, and his performance is fantastic on this album as well, but we never really get that standout Bill Ward freak out, like something on Supernaut from Volume 4, or something along those lines, but he really does a great job on this album, and nothing against him, it's just you never really get that standout Bill Ward moment, and same with Geezer Butler. I mean, like, his bass playing is absolutely incredible here, but we never really get that insane chugging bass lines that we heard on Master of Reality, like songs like Lord of This World, Sweet Leaf, and things like that. But again, Tony Iommi's at the top of his game, and Ozzy really shines as well. So yeah, I recommend this album to anyone even remotely into heavy metal. It's just awesome. And the next one too, Sabotage, is also a pretty experimental album. A little bit more pissed off than this album, a little bit more aggressive. But the core experimentation that the band started on Volume 4 and improved on this album is still present there. So I suggest that album as well. Alright guys, so that's pretty much my review of the album. Let's dive into track 1, Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. This is going to be tough, guys, because what I'm about to do is review one of my all-time favorite songs, not just in metal. This is across all genres, the title track of the album, Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. It's just a masterpiece. It means so much to me, and it's just one of those special songs that sounds just as good as it did the first time on the 1000th listen, and I'm not even exaggerating. This song here just I never get sick of this song. I'm always in the mood to hear this, and it's long been my favorite Sabbath song. In recent years, War Pigs and NIB, I kind of put them on par with this, sometimes even above this track. But for the most part of my life, this has always been my favorite Sabbath song. And I can honestly say this probably is in my top 10 songs of all time. I love it that much. It's just the perfect metal song, and the structure, the arrangement of it is just absolutely genius. It has not one, but two of the greatest riffs of all time. And I believe the second riff of this track is probably Tony Iommi's best riff. And I know that's saying something. I know that's, a really ambitious thing to say, but I think it's true. I think for me, that second riff just fucking, it's one of the heaviest things I ever heard in my life. And coming out in 1973, oh my god, guys, this must have been like a fucking game changer. But again, everything about this song fits into place with what I was talking about earlier on. It draws on many different influences. It has so many melodic moments, so many amazing time changes. And that's one thing Sabbath were amazing at. They were amazing at incorporating these crazy prog rock inspired time changes into their music. And not only that, but time changes that bring about totally different moods, totally different atmospheres than what the song kind of set it up as. Let me elaborate on that for a bit. I'm sure we all know this song. I'm sure we all kind of take it for granted, but let's kind of like dissect it and break it down. So it starts off with that iconic riff, the riff that really took Tony Iommi out of that writer's block state of mind. It's so heavy, it's so doomy, but yet it has this triumphant kind of apocalyptic sound to it, like Tony Iommi kind of proclaiming the apocalypse here. And it's just an amazing euphoric riff. And then when Ozzy comes in, he just sounds so intense, and the song just really, it's just shaping up to be one of the heaviest Sabbath songs. Then before you know it, we get this incredible transition. The acoustic guitars come out, and Ozzy Osbourne lays down this absolutely beautiful melody. Just taken out of context, if you were to put this into like a pop ballad, it would fit into place. But for this part of the song, for this verse to fit in with one of the most heavy, doomy, apocalyptic sounding Tony Iommi riffs, it's just a mark of true genius how they made that work. And I don't know how they did it, but they did it. It's just such a seamless transition. It's so beautiful. It's so melodic with the overdubbed acoustic guitars. And Ozzy just totally makes it. His vocal melody here, if he came up with that, that's all you got to show to any of the Ozzy naysayers, because it's absolutely incredible. And then before you know it, it transitions right back into that doomy opening riff. And I love how Ozzy ends it off by like the transition back into that. He always says something funny like, "You bastards," or I don't know, something hilarious like that. Really funny transition. And it kind of repeats that kind of pattern twice. And just when you think the song can't get any better, we get into this amazing classic Tony Iommi multi-track guitar solo, which was kind of like his trademark at this point. He loved multi-tracking his guitars, doing different things at the same time. Just really great. And yeah, the main riff's playing in the background the whole time, giving it that solid foundation. And now, you know, as if the song didn't throw enough at you already, here's where the song just goes from being one of the all-time greatest metal songs to being one of the all-time greatest songs. When we get the fucking riff, that's what I'm going to call it. I'm going to call it the riff. The heaviest, doomiest Black Sabbath riff from hell. You know the one I'm talking about. The absolutely chugging. It sounds like fucking from the pits of hell. It sounds like the whole weight of the world is falling on your shoulders. And then Ozzy comes in. And if you thought he was high-pitched earlier on in the track, oh, you ain't seen nothing yet. He's screaming like an absolute banshee. And it's honestly one of the greatest moments in music history for me when that riff comes in and Ozzy comes in with that absolute intensity. It's just one of the most frantic, intense moments in music history. And for me, it just sounds absolutely evil in the best possible way. And it basically just continues on like that for the rest of the track, about 2 minutes, and closes out with this awesome, frantic riff kind of ending the song. Just ending one of the all-time best songs. Honestly, I don't even know what else to say about it. I love it that much. I don't care if you say I'm overrating it. I really do think this is up there with Supper's Ready, Achilles' Last Stand. I can name a lot of other ones. Rush, a lot of Rush songs, as one of my all-time favorite tracks. So I can't give this anything less than a 10 out of 10. It's gold. It's pure fucking gold. So that's Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath.
The thoughts and images, the unborn child that never was
Honestly, guys, as far as I'm concerned, the album could have ended there, and it would have still been a masterpiece. Okay, I'm just kidding. There was only one track. But track number 2, A National Acrobat, honestly, you're thinking, like, what could possibly follow up on a track that fantastic? And after hearing National Acrobat, it becomes clear. This fucking song can. Because this track here, probably my second favorite on the album. Okay, probably my third favorite on the album, but it's an absolute masterpiece, just like Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. This one here really is one of those like epic length Black Sabbath songs, although it's only six minutes long, so just about as long as Fairies Wear Boots, maybe about a minute shorter than Hand of Doom. It goes through a lot, guys. It's basically 3 main sections that flow seamlessly from one section to the next, and each of these 3 sections is absolutely fantastic, especially the third section, which is just one of my favorite moments in Black Sabbath history. And the thing is, this song here, at first, I wasn't like a massive fan of the track. Like, I always loved it, but I never really considered it like a top 10 Sabbath song. But over the years, it just revealed itself to me, and it's hands down in my top 10 Sabbath songs. I mean, if this isn't, then fucking what is? Such an incredible song. And the funny thing is, Geezer Butler actually wrote the opening riff of the track. So earlier on, I mentioned that the whole band was relying on relying on Tony Iommi for riffs to kind of get the ball rolling. But Geezer Butler did write a few riffs back then, not all the time, but this is an exception. And it's a fantastic riff. It starts off with this really doomy, sludgy riff. It's kind of slow burning. But what I love about this riff is Tony Iommi backs it up with this multi-track guitar. So you get that chugging, heavy, distorted main riff with this higher pitched guitar in the background kind of mirroring that. And it gives it a great effect. It gives it more of this like triumphant kind of feel rather than this doomy, sludgy feel, which is really cool. And again, something that Tony Iommi was kind of doing on the title track as well with that main riff. It's just a larger than life riff. One of my all-time favorite Tony Iommi riffs. And fuck, we're like, what, 6 minutes into the album and we already got 3 of the greatest Tony Iommi riffs of all time. So, awesome way to open the track. And then I love when Ozzy's vocals come in, they're fucking fantastic. The riff just stops and starts, which was kind of like a thing a lot of blues bands were doing back then. But when incorporated into metal, I find that it gives it this nice, heavy effect. And I love Ozzy's vocals here. I mean, the verses just build as they go along, and sounds really intense. Again, there's a lot of overdubbing with his vocals here. So you get this really high-pitched Ozzy in the background, kind of superimposed with Ozzy's regular vocals. And it gives it this really sinister feel. And the track itself is pretty interesting. The lyrics are talking about, who decides which sperm wins, which sperm fertilizes the egg. And honestly, I think only Geezer Butler can come up with that shit, but I actually love the lyrics on the track. Some great lines, and really sounds epic, larger than life. Like, they're talking about something that really transcends humanity at this point. Great lyrics, great subject matter, really creative song. And this part here is groovy as fuck, and it lasts about, I think, 2 minutes and 15 seconds. But then the song totally changes, and what does it change it to? A funk-inspired groove of all things. Again, I wasn't kidding when I said Sabbath was taking a lot of influences right here, and it's undeniable. The main groove of this part of the song is extremely funky, and something Sabbath hadn't really dabbled in yet, but it still has that heavy bedrock in the background, still has that distortion to the guitar, so it's funk, but done in the style of Sabbath, which is absolutely fantastic. And, oh man, it's got the wah-wah pedal going on, just all the elements of funk rock. The bass is going crazy in the background, and that's just a fantastic midsection to the track. Then at 4:40, you think it's going to start getting heavy again. The second doomy riff comes back in, and it's gearing up to explode, right? But then it goes in a totally different direction. We get one of Tony Iommi's most euphoric, joyous, upbeat riffs, and this starts like the last third of the track, which is just this instrumental extravaganza. Honestly, one of my favorite Sabbath moments of all time, and I love how they just, at the drop of the hat, just changed the entire mood of this track. If you think about it, it started off doomy, heavy, dirgy, epic, then it went into funk. Now it's going into this euphoric, joyous riff. It's absolutely fantastic. And, I mentioned Bill Ward doesn't have too many standout moments on the album, but this section here is an exception. He's just bashing the shit out of his drum kit, and I love the interplay between his guitar playing and Tony Iommi's riffs, especially this one section. All the other instruments cut out, and it's just basically Bill Ward and Tony kind of doing this fantastic interchange. Absolutely great. And the whole song ends off with this crazy freak out, this flurry of instrumentation. It's just a joy to listen to. A National Acrobat. I would easily give this a 9.5 out of 10. Some days I feel a 10 out of 10, actually, but I'm just going to say 9.5. Absolutely epic song. One of the best on the album. Then we get track 3, Fluff, and this one here is a real curveball. I'm sure that this song really took everyone off guard the first time they heard it, because this song here is just, man, it is probably the most peaceful, serene Sabbath song of all time. And it's an acoustic instrumental composed by Tony Iommi. So at this point, Tony Iommi had done a couple of these on their albums. The last album having Laguna Sunrise, the one before that having Orchid, and can't remember the other one, but you know what I mean. We're used to having these little acoustic, classical Tony Iommi interludes, but this one here is 4 minutes, so definitely the longest one by far up to this point. And after all the energy and excitement this album's building up to, I gotta be honest, the first time I heard this track, I didn't like it. I thought it totally killed the vibe of the album, and I would always skip the song. But then recently, relatively recently, I'd say maybe like 1 or 2 years ago, I finally started listening to this track again, and I just let it wash over my body. It's just so peaceful, so serene, with Tony Iommi's multi-layered guitars, acoustic guitars, harpsichord of all things, giving it that playful medieval kind of sound, and piano, and he's playing all the instruments on this track. There's no drums, no bass, and it's just a peaceful song through and through with a fantastic melody. So now I actually really love it. And again, it's one of those things where the band was taking influence from folk and progressive rock and incorporating that into their sound. And I think it's a nice palate cleanser, a nice breather. And I totally have the patience for it. Now, I will admit, 4 minutes in length is kind of long for this track. Maybe if it was about 3 minutes, it would have been a bit stronger, because it basically does keep repeating the melody, which is actually very strong, but can be a bit repetitive. So maybe I would have given this song a higher score if it was 3 minutes, but for now, I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. So that's Fluff. And, I used to joke about this track saying, oh, it's the perfect title, Fluff, meaning like filler in this case. Like it's a filler. It's like a pillowcase filler or something. And I always thought that's kind of what they were doing. I thought it was like a tongue-in-cheek kind of thing. But no, it was actually named after this DJ who went by the nickname Fluff, who played Sabbath shit early on in their career. So there goes my theory. But, now that I like the track, I don't really refer to that anymore. So, good song. Then we get to the last track on this glorious album side, Sabbra Cadabra. Now let's just take a moment to appreciate that song title. Okay, now we can review it. So, honestly, what can you say about Sabbra Cadabra? It's famous for featuring Rick Wakeman on keyboards, and again, as I mentioned before, he totally elevates this song and proves that, you can incorporate honky-tonk piano into a metal track and make it sound good. So, I don't know if you could do that in general or just because of the genius of Rick Wakeman and Sabbath congealing. Who knows? But piano and metal definitely sound good together. And if you guys needed proof, listen to Sabbra Cadabra. And this song here is just, a lot of people seem to really love this track. I know Metallica were big fans, and it's definitely easy to see because the opening riff of this song and the opening melody definitely has some oomph to it, definitely has some speed to it, whereas Sabbath was usually pretty laid back, pretty slow, pretty dirgy. This one here is a pretty up-tempo track, and really catchy as well when Ozzy's vocals come in, and he sings that, basically it's a pop melody, it's basically a love song. It's just so accessible, so catchy, and I love how, like, Tony Iommi's guitar in the background has this kind of slide effect to it, giving it this bluesy atmosphere. But yeah, really nice, up-tempo song, really different from what Sabbath was doing in the past. And has some doomy riffs interspersed throughout, mostly when Ozzy stops singing, it kind of breaks up the action there. But for the most part, yeah, it's pretty up-tempo. So, just when you're getting into it, at the 2-minute mark, the whole song just changes, and it basically just stays this way for the rest of its 6-minute runtime. And this section here is really the meat and potatoes of the track, really the substance, when Rick Wakeman comes in with his blaring synthesizers, and all of a sudden, we haven't heard anything like this on any Sabbath song. It's literally like a jolt of lightning. It's like, what the fuck? And yeah, it's a full-on, it basically becomes a full-on progressive rock song, and I mean that in the purest sense of the word. It's so progressive. There's things that you would never think would work together that do. Prime example, the heavy riffing and honky-tonk piano outro. I mean, for the most part, Rick Wakeman's playing is pretty jazzy on this part during the verses, but later on in the track and in between the verses, he starts playing this really funky honky-tonk piano, and with Tony Iommi's heavy riffing in the background, it shouldn't work, but it just does. So absolutely fantastic how they made that work. And I love how they give it time to really ride out. Again, like the last 1.5 to 2 minutes of the track, it's just this nice jam with I could just picture all these guys in the studio, Rick Wakeman having a great time, drinking a few brews, playing that honky-tonk piano, and just probably having a way better time than Yes in the studio next door, reading all those ancient Indian scriptures and things like that. But anyway, yeah, it's just such a joyous track. And I love Ozzy's vocals as well in this part of the song. This one here is awesome. I mean, like, he's laughing. He gives these evil laughs in the background during that extended fade out. But during the verses, they're awesome as well. Really high pitch, really intense. And I love how there's like this heavy effect on his vocals. And that's probably the heaviest part of the entire track. When that fuzz comes into Ozzy's vocals, and then we get into that heavy section, but before you know it, it gets into the honky-tonk section, which breaks up the verses. So really, when you think the song is going to build up to its absolute heaviest, we go into the completely opposite direction, which Sabbath were just masters of doing. So Sabbra Cadabra, just another stone cold classic, easily a 9.5 out of 10, easily.
I'm telling you, believe in me, nobody else will tell you. Open your eyes and see the lies. Oh yeah.
Okay, guys, next song here, Killing Yourself to Live. It's no secret how much I fucking love this song. This is probably a top 5 Sabbath song for me. One of my all-time favorites, and my second favorite song on the album, just slightly beating out a National Acrobat. And this is just another one of those Sabbath songs, like National Acrobat, like Sabbra Cadabra, that go through so many different changes, so many different moods. And what I love about this track, it's only 5.5 minutes, but literally goes through 3 amazingly distinct sections. And what I love about that is that breaking up these 3 sections, we have climactic Tony Iommi guitar solos. And what I mean by this, it's the trademark classic Tony Iommi climax, where he has 2 guitars simultaneously overdubbed, playing these 2 passionate lines with a bedrock of a heavy doomy riff. It's the classic Tony Iommi formula, and really a lot of my favorite Sabbath songs use it, like the climax of War Pigs, the climax of NIB. It's just, he really, I think even on Wheels of Confusion's climax, he really makes great use of that, and if Tony Iommi's doing that, that's it, the deal's over. It's automatically one of my favorite Sabbath songs. So he does this not once, but twice during the entire track. But anyway, I guess we should take it from the top. So kicking it off, we get this nice groovy riff. It's doomy, but it has more of a groove to it than a lot of their other stuff. Kind of like the intro of National Acrobat. But yeah, fantastic riff. Then we get this really ominous, almost like tremolo effect coming in on Tony's guitar. And then when Ozzy comes in, it gives it this really sinister effect. And I freaking love the lyrics on this track, guys. Not only the vocals, but the lyrics. I always used to interpret this song as, killing yourself to live, like going out to work, doing a monotonous job, leaving your family at the wayside for like 65 years, and then retiring and finding out, you wasted your whole life, and now you're too old and sick to really do anything and to enjoy time with your family. That's how I interpreted it. But apparently, this song is actually about Bill Ward and Geezer Butler, who were both hospitalized, and I think Geezer was hospitalized for something wrong with his kidneys caused by alcohol intake. I don't know how that works, but usually it goes for the liver. But yeah, he ended up in the hospital, and he basically wrote this song like about drugs, and it makes sense because later in the track, Ozzy does enticingly say, "Smoke it, get high," giving you kind of like the impression that the song's about drugs. But it makes sense, you do drugs to have a good time, basically to live, but you're killing yourself to live. Like, those drugs have horrible effects that could put you in the fucking hospital, or worse yet, in the grave, like a lot of their rock contemporaries. So really meaningful song, really epic. And in the first 2 to 3 minutes of the song, that's basically what the message of the track is trying to get across, and it's more of the epic section of the track. And during the breaks between Ozzy's vocals, we get absolutely doomy Sabbath riffs, and I'm talking like the main riff of Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, like the riff, that kind of thing, and it's just extremely heavy. Then, as I mentioned, we get into the Tony Iommi signature climax with the overdubbed guitar solos, and it gets really epic. Some really epic lines after that, especially where Ozzy's saying, "I'm telling you, believe in me, nobody else can tell you." That part there, it's like, fuck, it's like, preach it, Ozzy. He sounds like absolutely intense there. And then another climax at the 3-minute 50-second mark. And then it gets into this pretty jazzy groove. This section here I love, where Ozzy's singing, "I don't care if I'm up or down," but, that section there. It's just really weird coming at the end of the song. Again, it's pretty upbeat, pretty catchy, kind of poppy, and a great melody, like Sabbra Cadabra's main riff. So, again, there's continuity throughout this entire album, and this is one of the poppier ways to close the song, but it ends up with some great drumming by Bill Ward, and an absolutely climactic ending where you think the song is just going to explode, and then it just suddenly stops. So much to talk about, guys. I mean, so much happens in this track, but suffice it to say, the first 2.5 minutes, that's where you're going to get your epicness, your heavy, doomy riffs. The middle section's like this really intense basically climax, and the rest is kind of like this jazzy, poppy kind of Sabbath tune. So really a lot going on here. Killing Yourself to Live is a 10 out of 10. No question.
Stop begging, tell me, in the name of hell, why
And now we get into one of the darker, more sinister moments on the album. And I bet you're thinking, oh god, it's another one of Tony Iommi's classic doomy riffs. But no, it's actually a Moog synthesizer-driven track written by none other than Ozzy Osbourne. That's right, this guy bought a Moog synthesizer, which was just coming out at the time, or had been out for a few years, I can't remember. And it was all the rage in progressive rock, and Ozzy had to have one. So he bought one, brought it to the studio, and he was just fucking around with it. And he ended up coming up with this great, doomy, sludgy kind of riff on the Moog synthesizer. Really simplistic, but really has this heavy, dark atmosphere. And I find it hilarious how, leave it to a member of Black Sabbath to take this fucking synthesizer, and the first thing that comes out of it are these doomy, trademark Black Sabbath riffs. And I just found that hilarious right from the start. And the thing is, this song here, it did take me a while to warm up to. It's a really slow-burning, dirgy, doomy, evil-sounding track. So really similar to something that would come off Volume 4 or Master of Reality. But only with the only difference being the Moog synthesizer instead of the slow-burning guitar riff by Tony Iommi. So it's a really unique track. And Ozzy gives it a really sinister vocal performance as well. But here's the thing I love about this song. This is what really elevates it. In the middle of the track, after all this doom and gloom and evil, we get this beautiful symphonic section. I mean, it's absolutely gorgeous. We got Ozzy playing the piano in the background. The Moog synthesizer still going. We got regular synthesizer going in the background. Mellotron. Basically, all these keyboards just coming together in this crescendo, this beautiful crescendo. It really feels like, this is the musical embodiment of the clouds parting or the sun rising after a long night. It's just a beautiful, gorgeous, unexpected moment that you would never think of Sabbath doing. Just very symphonic. And again, that prog rock influence definitely played a part here. I believe, Geezer Butler actually played the mellotron on this part, giving it that string section vibe. I don't think Ozzy knew how to play it. But yeah, fantastic section. And it lasts about a minute or a minute and a half, and then it gets right back into the doom and gloom of the main theme of the song. So yeah, Who Are You? This song grew on me so much over the years. At first, I didn't really like it. I thought the Moog was kind of annoying. It is a really simplistic, repetitive riff, and I didn't really appreciate it that much. But now, over the years, that middle section, that's the reason that keeps me coming back. But I've also grown to appreciate the slow-burning, hypnotic feel of the first and third kind of chunks of the track. So, excellent song. I would give Who Are You an 8.5 out of 10.
But overnight, you're the one who has to take the blame. Everyone just gets on top of you. The pain begins to eat your pride.
Okay, so coming up next, we got Looking for Today, which is definitely one of the most accessible Sabbath songs. I think anyone could get into this. You don't really have to be into metal at all to really appreciate this track here. It's just a nice 5-minute pop rock tune, for lack of a better word. This really is a pop tune right here. It isn't very heavy. It's based on this bouncy, melodic kind of vocal line delivered by Ozzy Osbourne. The guitar riffs aren't too distorted or anything. It's just Black Sabbath having a good time. And really commercial sounding, but definitely good. Definitely has a few tricks up its sleeve. What really makes this song for me is this kind of like psychedelic section where we get a flute or a keyboard trying to sound like the flute coming in, and Ozzy singing, "Everyone just sits on top of you." I don't know, it's beautiful. It gives it this nice psychedelic vibe. I really like that section there, and I also like the hand claps during the verses, again, giving it that really poppy feel. The Beatles would do that a lot, using the hand claps in the background, and yeah, I wasn't kidding when I said the Beatles would be proud of this shit. The only thing I would criticize this song for is the vocal line, "Looking for today." I don't know, like, it just grates on my ears after a few listens. It's a little bit too repetitive for me, but overall not too offensive. The main meat and potatoes of the track is really great, and I would give Looking for Today a solid 8 to an 8.5 out of 10. So yeah, not one of my absolute favorites on the album, but it's a pretty good song.
Of all the things I value most in life, I see my memories and feel their warmth and know that they are good. You know that I should.
Alright guys, so we're finally at the last track on the album, and this album goes off on an absolute bang, let me tell you guys. Spiral Architect, definitely one of the best songs on the album, and you know, I feel like I'm honestly saying that about every single track. I mentioned earlier, A National Acrobat was my second favorite, Killing Yourself to Live was my second favorite. Really, those four songs, National Acrobat, Killing Yourself to Live, Spiral Architect, and Sabbra Cadabra. Those four songs there, they're really just so close in quality that it's really hard to pick a second favorite. Obviously, my favorite's going to be the title track, but among those four, they're all just so phenomenal. And Spiral Architect, I mean, this is the song here where the band brought in the orchestra, and what I love about this song is they never really overuse the orchestra. Like, sure, it's there, you can hear it, it stands out, and it adds a lot to the song, but it's never dominating. Like, you never feel like this is just an orchestrated song with Black Sabbath elements. It's the other way around. It's a Black Sabbath song with orchestrated elements. And it's great. And again, this isn't your typical Sabbath song. This one here just feels extremely, I don't know what, it's an extremely moving song, actually, guys. I mean, it isn't very heavy. It does have some haunting moments to it, but this one here is just a moving song, and the lyrics by Geezer Butler are absolutely wonderful. They're so cosmic, really talking about, you know, the construction of DNA, and really, I feel like this song is about God, trying to find God, describing like the intricacies of human DNA and things like that. Just fantastic lyrics. And apparently when Ozzy heard these lyrics for the first time, he just had to call Bill Ward and congratulate him, because the lyrics really touched Ozzy. And at this point, maybe I should have mentioned this earlier on in the review, Ozzy was relying heavily on Geezer Butler for lyrics at this point. Sure, he would come up with these amazing vocal melodies, but really just like the whole band kind of like stood in like a deer in the headlights when Tony Iommi didn't have any riffs, Ozzy kind of stood like a deer in the headlights when Geezer didn't provide him with lyrics. So he was just ecstatic when Geezer wrote Spiral Architect, because that was a point where Geezer was actually getting writer's block, and then all of a sudden he comes out with these lyrics, and you gotta love the parallel with Tony Iommi and his riffs, because it's such a coincidence that both of these things happen on the same album. But needless to say, Spiral Architect has some absolutely cosmic lyrics, and this whole song just sounds epic, larger than life, especially with the orchestra. It's absolutely wonderful. And Ozzy's fantastic vocal melodies, it just feels like, it feels like somebody accomplishing something and then just feeling content with life. It's such a peaceful, but not a serene song. Like, you get a sense of inner peace, inner calm when hearing this. But it never feels boring. It never feels slow-paced. It's just such a feel-good, it's such a weird song, so hard to describe. And, again, I mentioned it had some sinister elements to it. That would mainly be the amazing, haunting, classical-inspired acoustic guitar intro by Tony Iommi, which lasts almost 45 seconds to a minute, and it's just absolutely haunting. And then when the main riff comes in and Ozzy comes in with that really emotional line, the song totally changes from that ominous vibe to the triumphant, feel-good vibes of the rest of the track. Absolutely powerful song, guys. Spiral Architect, easily a 9.5 out of 10. One of the best Black Sabbath closers, in my opinion, and there have been many, but Spiral Architect is definitely one of them. Just an incredible song. And yeah, I think that's all I got to say about it, guys. It's just, you just got to go and listen to it. It's a really strange song in their discography, but absolutely wonderful. Oh man, guys, and that's it. And that's Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. What an incredible album. I told you guys I had a lot to say about this album, because I'm really passionate about it. It's one of my all-time favorites, and really, objectively speaking, it probably is their greatest album. Even better than Heaven and Hell, I would say. Personally speaking, again, that debut album just speaks to me on so many levels, so that will always be my favorite. But this one here is extremely close. So anyway, guys, tell me what you think below. Is this the best Ozzy-era Sabbath album? Am I overrating it? Am I underrating it? Whatever you guys want to say, comment down below. And stay tuned for more videos. Definitely more Sabbath videos coming your way, guys. There's so many albums in their discography, and obviously I'm going to be reviewing all of them. So stay tuned for more. Peace out, guys.